What do you think?
So, now that you've gotten a look, what is your opinion on our temporary abode? Hello everybody, and welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel if you're new here. My name is Death by Pony. Today we're hopping back into our life. So without further ado, let's hop in. Hello everybody, and welcome back to our life. We're hopping right back in where we left off. And we're gonna hop into Mountain. And then I'm going to play through all of this on my own. And with boating, I know we can invite Baxter to go with us, so I might record that to see if there's anything different. And the late shift, because Baxter shows up. And then when the summer ends, Baxter can show up. So I might record that too, just so if there's anything new, I have it. No two summer evenings in Sunset Bird look quite the same. Not downtown, not the beaches, and not on a street where the only change that anyone had seen in years was the arrival of a new tourist. Though you hadn't seen any stars in the sky, you knew that the day was almost over. The sound of chirping crickets. Shadows of swaying branches were stretched across the grass. Well, probably. You hadn't gotten the chance to experience the sunset, but you got pulled into whatever this was while trying to clarify your plans for tomorrow with Baxter. He paced back and forth between a pair of half-packed or half-unpacked, depending on how someone saw it, suitcases, piles of folded clothes, or abandoned on the bed. As so far away from the disaster area as possible, you sat on the only untouched part of the mattress. You laid across the top half of the bed closest to the headboard. You helped pick up a few things Baxter left lying on the floor. You leaned against the dresser, amused. I'm a laying down person. Baxter didn't mind where you were, happy to work around you, or more probably he just didn't notice. He accidentally threw a pair of rolled up socks in your face earlier. He apologized profusely for it. This wasn't the first time that you'd been in the condo Baxter invited you over before, but so far it'd only been the first floor. You were in the master bedroom now. As a kid, the condo was the equivalent of Fort Knox, no way in, and if someone unwanted did sneak inside, there was probably no way out. It just wasn't worth the risk. Being in that room was closer to fantasy than it was in reality, as much as someone could dream about being in a rental room anyway. Okay, let me just take a sec. Let's see here. Door. There really doesn't seem to be anything Baxter in this room. I mean, he is only staying for the summer, but I would expect maybe something Baxter put up there. And yet, here you were, all thanks to Baxter, who didn't seem to realize the gravity of the situation. On the door of the armoire, his word for it was ajar. Hangers rattled from excessive force Baxter used to remove for a few for his jackets. Honestly, you weren't sure why he'd packed them at all. It never got cold enough anywhere in Southern California to wear outerwear during the winter, never mind the summer. And yet, he still brought them, no matter how much he was convinced otherwise.
So?
It'll be cooler in temperature, but just barely. While we won't be seeing any snow, I would suggest you bring a jacket and a sturdy pair of shoes. He pulled another zipper on the suitcase, peering into it, its contents, but not deeply investigating for long enough. He moved on to the next thing, a drawer filled with nothing but he abruptly shut. He waded past the only part of his wardrobe that remained neat and in place, formal clothes. The suit he wore to the interactive play was perfectly arranged for use at any minute in case there was another regal emergency. Baxter hesitated before leaving that be. His fingers grazed the top of the comforter as he passed. James, if you would. You moved aside as he wove through an increasingly intricate disaster area to look for something else that he had made clear to you. It seemed that up until now, Baxter had been living out of his suitcases, which wouldn't ordinarily strike you as a problem until he said he needed at least one of them to be empty. If only so that he could relocate his things from one to the other. He was certain that he'd need no more than an afternoon to pack before you arrived. But there were some things in this world that not even the likes of Baxter Ward could handle with grace and composure. Mornings were one, Personal organization was
I
another.
apologize.
I must apologize. He stopped in his place, the corner of his eyes softened as he turned to you, brows knitted together, even as he brushed his hands with folding pair of pants, only to immediately throw it into the suitcase. I realize I can't be terribly entertaining. Just don't worry about it. He didn't need to apologize. There wasn't any problem waiting, and besides, it was more amusing than he gave it credit for. That is one of your charming points. In for a penny, in for a pound. He chuckled, shaking his head with quiet amusement. Content with your reply, he went back to unconsciously constructing a labyrinth of his possessions. You wondered how he fit everything into 2 suitcases to begin with. This entire situation made about as much sense as anything else around him, which was to say that made a quarter of it followed any linear train of thought. The rest left much to be desired. Baxter had a tendency to work through things in a sort of circuitous sense, his own logic that he used to explain things as a matter of fact, so much so that you couldn't help but just take him on his word, even if the details only made themselves clearer later. What was happening now was even more convoluted than normal. At the first point, Baxter very suddenly announced he was going on a vacation away from his vacation, a 3-day, 2-night jaunt to a mountain lodge, a handful of hours away by his judgment. Plans were already underway as soon as he figured out he was staying in California. It made sense if he was trying to get more bang for his buck for his experience in the area, but that wasn't the main reason. Second point was it was a family tradition happening without his family. He and his parents always went to the Rockies in summer, except this time he was staying in California. Baxter decided to make a trip out to the mountains here regardless, and that was also fine, except he wasn't prepared for the trip at all. You would have thought that someone else planned when and where it happened, with the way he was rushing around the condo trying to pack and trying to remember what to pack. He pointed in point 3, the most peculiar. He rented a second room in the lodge despite coming here alone to visit no one in particular. He didn't have some acquaintance in the state, but none of them were people he wanted to take a trip with. Audaciously, after explaining the situation, he asked you to take up the free room without missing a beat. You, a person who dated him for all of half a second. A couple's trip was the kind of thing that was more appropriate for months down the line, something to cement a relationship as steady. But apparently, being together at all was plenty enough for Baxter. The weekend was free, and your moms were able to accept the idea of you going. Going up to the mountains to stay in a lodge was a cool opportunity. It wasn't the kind of trip you and your family took. Not that you'd taken many trips since your break got busier and Liz moved away, so the prospect of traveling anywhere farther than the city was exciting, even if the entire situation was pretty absurd. Negotiating with your mothers went better than expected. They hadn't vetoed it immediately because you were an adult, but they weren't excited about the idea. It was one thing if you were going on a trip with the usual cast of suspects, but Baxter, a guy you basically met the other day, he was polite and well-spoken. However, your mom didn't know his parents, a rule that you thought was obsolete once you were in high school, but not when it came to overnight trips. They eventually gave their blessing when Liz took your side in the discussion. She was convinced by the fact that you'd be staying in an entirely separate room to him. I gotta ask, what was your plan if I said I didn't go? So let me guess, there was a buy one get one deal on the hotel rooms? Having a second room just because seemed like a Baxter thing to do. A good guess, but no, there was no such deal. I requested it to be the case. Baxter's hands stalled over the suitcase he was bringing on the trip. He brushed back his hair into place, turning to his side to search for another misplaced necessity.
Of course.
I thought there was a possibility I might make friend during my stay here. There was no guarantee, of course. I wouldn't hope to make any presumptions there. His gaze wandered, his lips tightened at the corners of his mouth involuntarily, his contemplative expression faltering as he looked up from his suitcase to you. But I thought that if I did, then would the trip not be made exceptionally better with company? If not, then so be it. Acquiring a room is the difficult part. A reservation to be made weeks in advance, whereas canceling only needs a notice of 48 hours or more. It's taken off the bill, no questions asked. Realistically, I would only need 2 days to know if I was going alone or with company.
See?
That was the case with you, was it not? You were so over the top. You know that, you chuckled. Well, I'm glad they're so accommodating about it. I hate for you to lose the deposit. I feel like I should have known. You're certainly an optimist. You couldn't help but shake your head in disbelief. You applauded his stunt. You're certainly an optimist. Better an optimist than a pessimist, I say. Baxter went back to packing, though his suitcase looked to be dwindling in quantities more now than they'd been earlier in the evening. He glanced over his shoulder at you, a black shirt folded in his hands as neatly as any store display you'd seen in your life. This might not be an ideal time to ask, but as you were speaking about the trip, I didn't want to ask as to where your personal boundaries lie, James. I'm deeply appreciative of your mother's approval, but what I am comfortable with may not mirror what they are comfortable with. You only need to say so if you are in agreement with their preferences, but if not. Baxter had a tendency to act a lot older than he actually was. It was times like these when he smirked entirely too mischievously that you were reminded that he was barely any older than you.
Well,
I may forget by the time we get there. Conspiratorial looks were exchanged from across the room as you smiled crookedly. Baxter was a real one when it came down to it. Moms were hoping Liz could come along too, so I wouldn't be alone. He didn't look surprised by the suggestion, apparently aware of how it must and certainly did come off to your parents to invite their youngest on an overnight trip. But she argued I wasn't going out of state and I'm not still a kid. I just have to call Liz every day. I mean, call. She won't let me get away with just texting. If I don't, she said she'll call the hotel instead and the police and anyone with a phone number to report that Pepe Le Pew was on the loose. Baxter snorted, not laughed, full-on snorted. He covered his mouth quickly, avoiding your gaze as he had to resist the urge to laugh harder. You didn't know whether he'd seen the original cartoon or one of the more recent uses of the character, but he definitely got the reference. I was prepared to give your sister my thanks for convincing your mothers, but it appears everyone has notes on my manner of dress these days. Yeah, Mom joked that those old-fashioned black and white striped jumpsuits inmates wore would match your hair, you know, if Liz did call the police on you. How clever. Is a black and white tie out of vogue, James? You aren't wearing a tie. Trying to suppress the grin was nigh impossible, especially after reliving the conversation about his vague resemblance to an aggressively forward skunk and a criminal. Baxter chuckled as he put away another pair of pants, which the number of which you'd long lost count of as he went back and forth.
charming.
Your family is quite charming, and I do agree that it's only fair. Try to keep in touch with them while you're away. I'll trust you care for my fate enough to do that much. For sure, I don't want them to worry. Yeah, it sucks, but I'll call them. Liz wasn't joking. Are you going to keep in touch with your parents? You're not in agreement, of course. We're going to call you. Merely shrugged. For sure, I don't want them to worry. Excellent. It is sweet that you care for each other so deeply. The itinerary for the trip was straightforward enough that Baxter didn't need to look at his laptop to read the details. He kept to his work on the suitcases. Check-in wasn't until 4 p.m. at the earliest, and the drive wasn't so significant that you'd be gone as long as you feared. So the plan was to leave at noon, find dinner somewhere in the area when you got there, and then check in to the lodge in the evening. First day would be getting there. The second would be exploring the area in earnest, and the third would be taking the morning easy before checking out at noon and heading back home. Well, home for you, vacation home for Baxter. It was perfectly reasonable according to him. He wouldn't be overextending himself to prepare on either of the big driving days, and you'd have a good amount of time in the lodge. Besides, if he drove that much early in the morning, you were pretty confident you wouldn't make it back in one piece. And upon further inspection, Baxter's own supplies, there were a few things left to pack and a few more things you needed to buy. I don't suppose we'll need any formal wear, but on the off chance that we'll have dinner at a restaurant that necessitated that, I think it'll be okay with that. But I'll see you tomorrow, Baxter. I gotta pack too. Good luck. As you started to make your way out of the master bedroom, his head snapped up.
See you.
Oh, of course. I'll see you tomorrow, James. Have a good evening. Morning came uneventfully, save the final warning from your family about how they deploy a full-fledged investigation team the minute that something seemed off. He agreed that you would call daily, but it didn't do much to dissuade the endless worrying. Liz didn't pull any punches either, least of all after your family helped you load your things into the back of Baxter's car. At least she's got the same shit-eating grin. It's always the same. Ma and Liz pulled you into a hug as Mom shut the trunk with a click of finality before she joined in the squeeze. Don't forget that I'm watching him, James. I'll come get you if you need me to. Just say the word. Doesn't matter when, okay? I know. Your family meant well, but it wasn't as if you could forget after the 900th time that they reminded you call and check in with them. Liz snickered at the three of them continuing to hold you in a crushing hug. Well, if you know, then don't be surprised by what happens when you don't. I can't believe I'm going to get hunted for sport. She just beamed cheekily in reply, elbowing you in the ribs.
What a pickle.
Right, I trust James to do his job, but Baxter, you'll be careful with our child, won't you? You couldn't see what their faces looked like because of the way they held you. However, you could hear the apprehension in Baxter's tense laugh.
I can do that.
Of course, you have my word, ma'ams. A perfect gentleman's response from him, as always. As you were freed, Baxter made his way to the passenger side. He opened the door for you with a sweep of his arm. Bye. Mom and Liz waved you off as you slid into the car, shutting the door behind you. As soon as the seatbelts clicked and the engine roared to life, you reversed out of the driveway and rumbled away from your neighborhood to the freeway. The familiar sights of Sunset Bird eventually gave way to Prism Vista City, then to the open space between here and there. You couldn't smell the salt in the air anymore, and for a moment it felt odd to remember there weren't beaches everywhere that you went, even in the same state. The radio set to a classic music gave a nice bracket to backtrack to Baxter's storytelling of other trips he'd taken with his parents up to the Rocky Mountains. Those memories gave an idea of what to expect when you arrived at the cabin. Even though he glazed over some of the details, he'd even mentioned odder experiences, one of which included getting chased across the river by what he and his family thought was a bear, but turned out to be a particular chubby dog who wanted to be friends. The ride was smooth as it could be, except for the occasional congestion of traffic. That was always inevitable this time of year. Baxter wasn't the only tourist. Eventually, the massive freeways calmed down to 2 lanes and the elevation grew steeper and steeper. Road cuts through canyons, giving scenic views. You still texted your friends and family between conversation, sightseeing until you lost signal. By the time you hit your first official checkpoint, it was late in the day. You stopped at the roadside for a bite to eat before finishing the last leg of your trip. You offered to drive, but Baxter waved it off. It was already enough that you came at all. Making conversation with you also made it less of a dull task, so he didn't mind. And maybe it was better that way, since Baxter was renting it. If anything did happen, it'd complicate the matters if he wasn't driving. After the short final stretch, the car rolled to a stop in front of the massive log hotel. It towered over your head. When you stepped out of the vehicle, Baxter handed the keys to the attending valet. The lodge was somehow both rustic and fancy at the same time. For an oversized wooden cabin, the doors had big, elaborate wrought handles that you were sure must have cost a pretty penny. It appears that we have arrived. Baxter rounded his side of the car with bags in hand, smiling comfortingly as you stood there empty-handed, staring at the building. Really? I thought we were making a pit stop. Oh, then you'll be shocked at the actual hotel. The steps are paved in gold. Are you serious?
No.
I am not. Oh my god, look at how pretty. Look at it. Look at all the detailing. And the perspective on this is amazing. You both carried your things into the lobby. You hadn't brought enough with you that you needed to make a second trip. After all the consternation in his bedroom, Baxter had managed to shave everything he needed down to one bag in a suitcase. The lobby was as big as the front of the building suggested. Light piano music tinkled in the background, and an untraditional chandelier hung from the ceiling, sunlight shining through the glass doors and reflecting out carefully cut stonework. A fireplace burned at the far end of the lobby, for whom you could only presume to be guests, but despite all the chairs and couches available for them, there was scarcely a soul. It wasn't cozy, not in the way that you'd expect it to be, given Baxter only described it as a mountain lodge. It was big and impressive, and even the stairwell seemed more fitted for a medieval castle than a homey cabin in the woods. To one side of the front desk was occupied by staff who were busy with helping a larger party. We may be waiting a while. Why don't we set these down? He tugged at the strap of the crossbody bag he had over his shoulder and lifted the suitcase in his hand, gesturing for you to follow to the nearest open seating area, which was all of them. Footsteps echoed in the cavernous room when your bags hit the ground, as the sound of that did too. Baxter opted to set his bag in one of the chairs instead of sitting. He'd been stuck in the car for so long. He didn't make a point of stretching his legs, though ostensibly because it would have looked overly casual for a man such as him.
What do you think?
So, now that you've gotten a look, what is your opinion on our temporary abode? It's incredible. I couldn't have imagined it to be like this. I think it's overdone. Honestly, I feel a little out of place here. It sure isn't summer anymore, you joked. It's nice. You shrugged in reply. Sure isn't summer anymore. It feels more like fall or winter, not that we ever get either in Southern California. It does give that distinct cool weather impression, doesn't it? He turned his attention to the front desk. Though the situation hadn't improved at all, there were no signs of it clearing up now or in the near future. James, would you mind if I made a phone call? I'm considering making a call to my mother.
Honestly,
I do not often keep my parents appraised of my day-to-day life, but I do believe that they will be glad to know I arrived at this secondary vacation. His gaze dropped to the floor as his hand idly sneaked into the pocket to fish out his phone. His formerly polite smile became crooked. Am I not so bad a son that I cannot grant them that? Yeah, don't mind me. Thank you, I won't be more than a few minutes. And I'll have a chance to finally mention the lovely individual accompanying me. His teasing wasn't something to be missed, but it warmed your heart to know that Baxter considered your relationship meaningful enough to be mentioned even in passing to his parents. Officially withdrawing his phone, Baxter promptly brought up his contact and made the call. His hand rested on his hip while the other held the device to his ear. His head craned back towards the high ceiling as he awaited the dial tone before a voice too soft for you to hear, but loud enough for you to register greeted Baxter. Hello, Mother. It was nice to speak with you. We arrived at the hotel. The drive went well. He glanced over his shoulder at you before lightly pressing an index finger to his lips, as if to hush you before you could think of saying anything. You couldn't help but wonder if she caught onto the we, considering Baxter came to the state alone in the first place. Yes, I have James with me, my neighbor here. Of course, that is the greatest understatement of our relationship. He is quite special. Dear Mom, I said hi, you whispered to Baxter. I was worried, he shouted. You waited. Let's not interrupt this poor man. This was the closest approximation you'd ever gotten to the vague concept that was Baxter's parents, and it was such a small thing watching as he spoke to one of them over the phone. It felt so radically different than it did with your other friends. You knew Kara and Mr. Holden, just like you knew Derek, Randy, and Terry's parents. All you'd heard about Baxter's parents, other than that they were educated and old-fashioned, was that they didn't mind sending Baxter off to Sunset Bird for the summer. They wouldn't see him this season, and you wouldn't see them. You had to wonder if someday you'd get the chance to meet them or speak to them directly. It didn't seem like a priority for Baxter. You were only dating for a little while, though, so maybe it was enough to just let them know that you existed in the first place. After a few and yes, Baxter's attention shifted to the front desk, which was slowly being vacated by the previous group. Mother, it was truly lovely, but I do have to take my leave. Take care.
Oh, yes.
You too. And with only a brief goodbye, he hung up and pocketed his phone. He turned towards you, picking up his bag and his suitcase. Shall we go check in? Damn, this man is short with everybody. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, remember to hit like, That way I know you're enjoying the videos I'm making. Remember to subscribe. That way YouTube brings you back here to see what's next. And I won't take up any more of your time. Have a good day, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.